So 3 years ago, I had an idea for a book and I decided to go for it. And fast forward to today, I have just a couple weeks ago signed my third book deal. And my second book is going to come out in a couple months. And I wanted to tell you guys some key points to my story. For example, the fact that I self-published my first book before I sold it to a publisher. And I also wanted to tell you some of the things that I've learned along the way throughout working with a publisher and my self-publishing journey, and also just like my background and how I got to the point where I was ready to write a book. My name is Natalie Hammerquist, and I'm an herbalist, a forager, an educator, and now an author, and this is my publishing story. So I wanted to start with a quick summary of the books that I have so you guys can get an idea of the genre that I'm writing in. This is my first book, which came out last year. It's called Medicinal Plants of the Pacific Northwest, and it is a visual guide. I did all the photography for this book, as well as all the writing and all the recipe testing, so it was quite a lot of work. And my second book is going to be a companion guide to this, which is going to be Edible Plants of the Pacific Northwest, which comes out on September 1st, 2025. And then my third book is going to be Winter Twig ID, and that book is still kind of in the beginning of phases. A lot of photography is done, but some of the writing still needs to be done. So this book actually started as a Kickstarter, and I'll show you the original version. So that's the second version. This was the original version, which I designed and ran a Kickstarter to fund. And you know, they have pretty similar content. All the words pretty much the same, all the pictures are the same, but this one I was self-published on Amazon, and the other one I published through Mountaineers Books. Before writing this original self-published version, I actually met with what would become my future publisher to get an idea of what being published was like. And they basically told me like the advance that they would get and like the average advance for first-time authors, which is usually from like $5,000 to $8,000. And I was like, that is not going to cover the amount of effort that it's going to take to write this book. And so I immediately was like, okay, how can I make this happen? And the idea came into my head that I could do a Kickstarter because I already had a big community, which I'll talk about later on in this video about the things that I built before this happened. But I ran a Kickstarter and I did the math. And in order to like print and send out the books and pay myself, I needed to raise like $29,000, which was, for a first-time author, that's like a pretty big sum of money. But I did it, and I ran a month-long Kickstarter, and I have to say, like, a lot of family friends definitely supported, but a lot of my social media community supported, and then some total strangers supported this book. I think partially because it is a visual guide, which is kind of a revolutionary type of book, and there really isn't one for this bioregion. There are a lot of other great foraging books for the Pacific Northwest, but it was a unique niche, which I think is pretty key and can kind of guarantee success for a book if you have found a niche where there's a lot of demand, but there isn't a supply. So when you self-publish a book, there are a lot more things involved than when you work with a publisher. Usually a publisher does all of your graphic design, and they also lead the editing process, provide an editor, pay the editor, and they do a lot of the like strategy and a lot of like marketing even. But when you self-publish a book, I actually had to design this. I did hire somebody to do like templates for me because I didn't have enough money to hire somebody to design the whole book. I did have graphic design experience, and my mother did help as well because she was a graphic designer before she retired. And so all of these were actually quite difficult to get like perfectly straight. Thankfully, I discovered templates later on in the design process where you can kind of set up templates so that everything is in the exact same spot on every single page. And then also styles, so all the fonts are consistent throughout the whole book. So I learned a lot in the graphic design portion of this, and I had experience designing a book already in college. I helped with kind of a botany guide for one of the areas in my state. So that was really valuable experience to get here. And then I also hired somebody to do the cover. So I provided all of this, the photography and stuff, and she did the cover for me. So that was nice. Now I'm thinking about doing another self-published book as my book 4. And I feel a lot more confident about my graphic design skills since I have a lot of graphic design under my belt already. So I don't think I would actually hire any of that out at this point. But when I was in this stage 4 years ago or 3 years ago, I was definitely needing some help, and I'm glad that I hired that out. something that definitely blindsided me about the self-published process is the editing process. You kind of think like you can just type up some words and then read over it and it's good. But the editing actually took like about a month, and it took 4 different people working on it. Somebody, thankfully, very knowledgeable, volunteered to help with the editing process. And I had 2 proofreaders that volunteered, and then my mom actually was the star of the editing show for this book. I think she probably went through it herself 6 times or so and found a lot of different things and argued with me about a lot of different things. So if you are going to write a book, especially a book where accuracy matters, which to me, like, accuracy really matters because like safety is a thing. That's one of the conversations my mom and I had a lot of in the writing process of this book. And so I would definitely have a plan for editing, and I would definitely either hire a professional editor, or if you have a friend that is really dedicated to editing, you know, the personality type, like somebody who's really detail oriented, and is willing to do it for free, that's also great. But I would definitely get more than just their eyes on it if I were you, and definitely plan for the time. A lot of people say that writing the book is about half of the time and energy, and editing is the other half, which is a lot more, I think, than a lot of first-time authors might expect. So ultimately, I finished this book, I sent it out to my Kickstarters, and I started to market it, and I quickly realized that I did not have the capacity to get this book into the hands of the people that wanted it. And I also did not have the capacity to market this book in the way that it deserved. And so I actually decided to go to a publisher to see what that would look like. And I'm so glad I did. I ended up pitching Mountaineers Books, and I love them as a publisher. That's who, we'll switch to this version now. That's who did this version, and I actually had to unpublish the book. Like I said, I had to unpublish this version, wait about a year for this version to come back out. So that was kind of an awkward phase. And there was some like legalities around, like I wasn't allowed to sell this book anymore, and they put that in the contract and everything. So there's definitely some unique things we had to navigate because they had never done this before. Take a book that's already published and then buy it and then republish it. So some of the pros of going with the publisher is that they, I think, just did a much more professional job of designing it. And they also like made it smaller, which a lot of people liked from what I understand. But mainly the big thing about going with a publisher, especially if you choose the right publisher, is that they were able to get it into the hands of a lot more people. They were able to distribute it to bookstores all around the bioregion. I have literally found it at my local hardware store, at gift shops. People send me pictures all the time. They'll be like in a random city in Washington, and they'll send me a picture of my book sitting at a local gift shop. And those are ultimately people that I would not have been able to reach with just like my social media marketing of the self-published version. And I really appreciate that because this is a book I feel really passionately like I just wanted to make this topic really accessible to the most people. And so I really appreciate that it's in a lot of hands. One of the cons of going through a publisher is that you make a lot less per copy. Like for example, I'd probably make like $1 something per copy sold with the publisher versus if you self-publish, I mean, really you can kind of make whatever you want, but the margins are a lot higher. So you might make more like a 50% profit margin per sale, depending on how you price it. So that's definitely something to consider if you already have a really large social media following. Self-publishing might be a really good fit for you if you don't have to make a lot of effort already. I will also say that it was really cool working with the publisher on this book because I actually did a book tour and I got to be on TV twice, just like local news stations on daytime TV with my book. And I also got to give like 3 or 4 book tours at different bookstores, including Powell's Books in Portland, which is really famous. So it also gave me some cool experiences and again, like gave me a lot more reach as far as just people knowing who I am and what I do. Overall, I definitely do not regret selling this to a publisher. I think it was a fantastic move, and I'm really glad that my second book is also being done by them. I really enjoy working with them. They are a local nonprofit, independent bookseller, and but they also have like pretty good reach in the bioregion, so they're just like a really good fit for me, which I think is really important when you're an author to have a publisher that's a good fit for you, which partially includes like who are they reaching. It also includes like how are they treating you as an author. And are they able to give you the support that you need in marketing the book, but also like editing the book? So there's a lot of different aspects to working with a publisher. I've definitely heard people working with publishers where it didn't sound like a good fit and it didn't sound like they were being treated very well by their publisher. So I think it can go both ways depending on what publisher you're working for. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the pitching process because that's kind of the first thing that you do as an author. You can work with an agent, which is essentially you pitch the agent, and kind of like a real estate agent, they then go help you pitch publishers and select publishers, and then they get a cut of your book deal. I did not choose to do this for my books. In the future, if I have a larger book deal, like a narrative nonfiction type book, I might choose to hire an agent, because if you're working with a larger publishers, some publishers like won't even look at your pitch if you're not working with an agent. But for this book, I chose not to work with an agent. I pitched the publisher directly. I had already had an introduction from a friend who had published with this publisher, and so she recommended them also, just that they were a good publisher and good to work with. But I had already had an introduction, so going in, my pitch already had kind of an edge on other pitches that might be going in blind. So if you do have connections in the industry, I definitely recommend using them. And I actually learned how to write pitches from a young adult fiction writing class that I took like 10 years ago now, I think. And part of that class was actually talking about the publishing industry and how to write pitches and how to sell your book, which ended up being really helpful. I didn't end up writing a young adult fiction book, but I did end up writing this book, and a lot of the same things still applied. If you do have access to a class about pitch writing specifically, or even if there's just like YouTube videos that you watch, I recommend investing that time to learn how to do a pitch correctly. Because from what I understand, if you, like, for example, don't follow the rules or format for how a publisher wants your pitch to come in, they actually just throw it away immediately and don't even read it. Some authors actually spend time shopping around and like even pitch multiple publishers. I didn't end up doing this because I had one publisher that I really wanted and they said yes, and I negotiated with them a little bit on my contract, and I really love working with them. I've worked with some really amazing women. I love my editors. They treat me really well and they listen when I have feedback, and they really appreciate me and I really appreciate them, which is a great relationship. As I understand it, not all publishing relationships work that way, but my thought is part of it's the publisher and part of it is also how you work and approach the publisher. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit on some of my recommendations on how to show up in that publishing relationship. I also want to mention super quick that some people might want to pitch a larger publisher than I did. My publisher is relatively small. You can have like your small size publishers, your mid-size publishers, and your large publishers. The main difference between all of those is like how many people, how many customers can they reach. The big publishers obviously have a lot larger reach, but it's a lot more exclusive. The mid-sized publishers kind of in the middle, and the small-sized publishers are going to have a smaller audience. But one nice thing about some of the smaller publishers is they might be more niche and they might be able to access niche markets better, which is why it was a really good fit for my book, which is a bioregional book. And so a local publisher is going to be better able to reach local audiences specifically. So I think that one of the most important things to talk about when it comes to becoming an author is the steps that you build beforehand, before ever having the book idea and before ever writing the book. So I want to talk a little bit about that part of my journey because I think it's actually probably the most important part of this story of me becoming an author. So the first, most important part maybe is that you really have to have something to say when you're writing a book. And maybe it's your life story, in which case you already are the expert in that. But in my case, my book is about medicinal plants of my bioregion. And so you can't just, chat GPT that. Like, a lot of this is my personal experience with plants. So I spent many, many years, I think 13 years, studying this topic. I'm a little bit of a hyperfixator, and I really embraced that and just let myself obsess over medicinal plants and foraging and plants. And I read like every book. I took every class. I took every seminar. I took every intensive that I could find. I went to all the conferences. And I really just like relentlessly invested in my education and my knowledge. I also tested things. I went outside. I took pictures. I tried recipes. I tried remedies on myself. I tried remedies on my friends. And so I got as much direct experience and as much knowledge in my head as I possibly could. I also spent 6 years teaching before I wrote a book. I taught classes, year-long courses, and a lot of that really reinforced a lot of that knowledge. And I also learned a lot from my students and from teaching. And so that whole process really helped me get to the point where I had enough knowledge to just like write the book without needing to question or research. I just put what was in my head into the book, which actually made it really easy because this book is essentially like all the information on this topic that was already in my head. So I didn't need to consult outside resources. I didn't need to do research. I didn't need to do any interviews. I just brain vomited onto the computer, and it was pretty easy actually, the writing process itself. I would just sit down and write an entry of a plant, which are kind of like 1,500 to 3,000 words depending on the plant. And I just kind of write it in one sitting and then look over it, and then it would be done. So depending on how much you are an expert already in your topic, it might require some more time and energy to write. The second thing that was really important that I did in the building process before I wrote the book was I was building a following, both an in-person following from all of the in-person classes. I taught at conferences, I taught individual classes, and I also was invited to like collaborate on a lot of different events in the 6 years that I spent teaching before I wrote my book. And then I also built a social media following on both Instagram and Facebook. And actually, I recently started a YouTube channel as well. And so those are all outlets for people to discover you and build trust, which is really important, especially like when I did my Kickstarter. The fact that I already had that platform to do my Kickstarter on was really helpful. And I will also say that I don't have like a PhD in herbal medicine or botany, which is definitely like, if you're pitching to a publisher and they saw that you had a PhD in whatever it was, they'd be like, great, this gives this person credibility. But since I don't have that, the other things that they look for, one of which is like, does this person have people that support them? Are they connected with people in the industry? Do they have a social media following? And how many people are in that social media following? Like, can people trust this author? Are they a credible source? And that's actually part of the pitch writing process, is you have to write about why should people trust you. And so one of the best things you can do before writing a book is to build that trust so that when you go to write your pitch, you can confidently say like, yes, I have 10,000 followers on Facebook, I have 3,500 followers on Instagram, and I have taught classes all across the Pacific Northwest, blah, 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 whatever's true for you. You're gonna have a lot easier time having a publisher pick up your pitch and be like, okay, this is somebody I'm gonna pay attention to. So the third thing that I actually didn't expect or foresee that would be really helpful, but skills that I happened to pick up along the way of being an entrepreneur, were graphic design skills, which obviously saved me a lot of money on my self-publishing journey. And then photography skills. I took all the pictures from my first book, and then I actually took a photography class and switched to a DSLR, like a fancy camera, and did my second book on there and my third book as well. So I've learned a lot about photography through this process, and I've gotten some mentorship as well. So I didn't necessarily have that a ton before, but this has like helped me develop that skill and has been really helpful in my journey as an author of visual guides specifically. And the third thing is writing, right? That's kind of a seemingly obvious skill for an author to have, but I did take that young adult fiction writing class, like I had mentioned before. I also learned fairly good writing skills in high school and college, which was really helpful. And then I practiced, like I would write blog posts. I've always just really loved writing. I actually wrote fan fiction when I was a teenager, a young 13-year-old, which ended up being, good experience for this. So it actually doesn't even matter if the writing that you're doing is in the same genre of what book you're going to write, but just the practice of writing and revising and gaining ideas and brainstorming, all of those things are going to be helpful in your writing process. So the more that you can just do that, like maybe you start a blog, and even if no one reads it, that process and experience is going to be helpful for you in writing a book. Because writing a blog post, which maybe is like 1,000 to 3,000 words, versus a 50,000 word book, that's how many words my book has in it. The level of dedication and like discipline that it takes to sit down and write 50,000 words is a lot different than writing a blog post, but you can certainly start developing it by writing consistently in your life. All right, I'm gonna close out with some tips that I have for aspiring authors of kind of things that I've learned in working with a publisher and working in the publishing industry and writing industry in general. So the first tip is for working with publishers. I definitely recommend just being a good human to work with. One thing that's really important to me is like hitting my deadlines. Not all authors hit their deadlines, and I can tell you that it's stressful for publishers and hinders the publishing process. And also just like being open to their feedback and trusting that they know what they know, which is the publishing industry. And in some cases, you might assume that you know something, but actually they know it better. Which brings me to my second tip about working with a publisher, is that I would be able to recognize when you do know what you're talking about and they are out of their depth, because you are the expert in your niche, right? I am the herbalist and forager, and my publisher is in the publishing industry. So when it comes to knowing what my audience wants and how they're going to take something and what they are looking for, I'm actually the expert in that audience specifically. So there were a lot of times in the publishing process when they would make a decision, like for example, the cover of the book is something that I gave feedback on, where I had to push back a little bit and advocate for what I thought was right. And I did so like very respectfully and very clearly, and I backed it up with why I was fighting for that in the context of like, well, this is how I think my audience is going to want to see it, and this is how I think they're going to respond to it. And all in that process, I'm just like very clear, very open, very gentle in my communication style, but also firm in what I know in my niche. I also recommend starting from the very beginning to be organized. So organize the files that you have, make really clear folders of chapters, make really clear folders of photos and what pages they go on. That will make it easier for you, and it will make it easy for your publisher and your graphic designer and your editor to navigate all of your work, which again will make it much easier to work with you, and they will more likely want to work with you again. One thing that I've learned in this whole process is like how to make spreadsheets that clearly state like, this is the file name of the photo, this is the page it goes on, these are the edits that I would like to make to it, I would like to brighten it, I would like to lower the yellow in it. And making it very easy for somebody to come in and navigate that is just going to make your editor's life so much easier, and it will make it so that they don't have to come back to you and ask questions, so it'll actually save you time as well. Another little bit of advice for working with publishers is they are going to make decisions that you don't necessarily agree with. And the truth is, like, once you sell to a publisher, the project isn't fully yours anymore. Like, you are working with these people on equal footing, and sometimes they might even have like the final say. Well, they will have the final say on what happens to your book, which is kind of weird because especially your first book, feels like your baby. And so to give up that kind of control feels very vulnerable, especially when you maybe don't agree with some of the decisions they're making. And so I really encourage you to choose your battles, right? Some of them I would just let go if it doesn't feel super important. And then, like I said before, like, it's okay to advocate for your desires, but I would definitely set yourself up with the expectation, like, they may say no. And that's going to need to be okay with you if you're working with a publisher. If you're somebody who doesn't like to relinquish that type of control, it's possible that self-publishing might be a better fit for you. Okay, final bit of advice is to know your market and do market research, maybe even before you write the book, but definitely in the pitching process. And part of the pitching process is actually taking apart similar books and saying like why your book is going to be different from those books. And in fact, my publisher actually got back to me with more book titles and had me go look at those books and tell me that my book was different. So similarly, I kind of already knew a lot of this coming in from having been in the industry for a lot of years, but I know who the big players are in my field, and what they're coming out with, what their stances are and styles are. And I also owned all of these books that are like my book. And so I know what they're like, and I kind of know what they cover and what they don't cover. And all of that is helpful, A, when pitching your book, but also having a niche idea in the first place and understanding what parts of your market aren't being served. But then I would also research your audience. Like, what does your audience want? Do polls on Instagram. I do tons of polls, like figuring out where my audience's pain points are and what they actually need and what they respond to. And I also look at a lot of like post insights on, what posts are the most popular. I have a Patreon now, which really helps me see like, what are people looking at? What are people liking the most? What are people commenting on the most? Where are like the hot spots? And that really helps me understand how to serve my audience better. I wanted to finish up a little bit by talking about my second and third book deals, because I talked a lot about my first book deal. My second book was just so much easier. I think it's actually going to be a better book overall. The photography is better because I took a photography class. Kind of like from the first book, I identified what some of my weaknesses were and specifically worked on those weaknesses. And so the deal was also a lot easier to navigate because I had already had one deal with this publisher. It got fast-tracked because I'm already an author with them. And the deal is basically the same deal, same advance, same royalties deal as my first book was. And so again, that second book is going to be like a companion guide to the first book. It's Edible Plants of the Pacific Northwest. If you're interested in checking it out, I'll put a link in the comments or in the description. And my third book is going to be Winter Twig ID, which actually was kind of an accident. I got bored last winter and started learning about Twig ID and got really into it and started taking really beautiful macro photography of these twigs. So like tiny little twigs are going to be like giant on the page. Again, another visual guide. And I kind of just started like designing a little self-published like pamphlet. And my author, I told my publisher about it and they were like, oh my gosh, this is a great idea. Like, can we publish it? We would love to publish it. And so I actually like just accidentally had this idea and they loved it. And so book number 3 ended up happening and it's going to come out, I think in a year and a half. Yeah. Fall 2026. So that book will be really fun. And I think it'll just be like another contact point of getting people out in a season that people have more trouble appreciating here in the Pacific Northwest, like the wintertime, and get people looking at trees and twigs in a more exciting way. So I feel excited about that idea as well. So I really hope that some of this video lands with you and helps you on your own publishing journey. If there are any pieces of this that you would like more information on, feel free to comment. I do have a Patreon community if you're interested in foraging. I write articles about all different things, plants, foraging, ethics, but also some spiritual things like how to connect to your body and different types of meditation that I do. And it's a really fun little Patreon community. So links to all of those things will be in the description if you're interested. And I also make videos here on YouTube, so I hope to see you in another one of those. Thanks for watching.